Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is the official start of the kickoff meeting of the Manhattan Beach Botanical Garden. And this is 2015, and I'll tell you, we are finally seeing in the news the big reasons why this whole garden was created in the first place. And so I want to go ahead and welcome everybody again. And has anybody heard that there's a drought?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay. In fact, the New York Times and LA Times have come out and said it's a mega drought. And you know, one of the interesting things is this was a couple of years ago. The newspapers came out and said it's the worst drought in 500 years. Now, I only because I've done the research, I knew that they began record keeping. Does anybody know what year they began record keeping of weather for LA? It was 1895. Okay. Okay. So now, how long ago did they say Columbus sailed the oceans? It was about 500 years ago, right? Okay. So they came out with an article that said that this drought that we're going through now, this historic drought, that it was the worst drought in over 500 years. And I'm like, what newspaper from Columbus time do we have? Well, okay, well, here's what's happened is if you look at the trees actually are like a newspaper from ancient times. And trees that have fallen in the last 500 years, they can tell if the tree rings are really close together, that means there was drought. If they're far apart, they had a lot of water, they grew a lot. So looking at the tree rings, arborists are able to determine that, read those ancient newspapers, that this drought is the worst in 500 years. It gets worse than that. They've since concluded, they have trees that have fallen in our century that have actually go all the way back 1,500 years. So you read the newspapers of ancient times, the trees, and this drought is worse than anything we've seen in 1,500 years. And this is a pretty interesting, the times we're living in. According to the Metropolitan Water District, every day Southern California imports about 1.5 billion gallons of water. You ever go to the store and you buy a gallon of the Sparkletts water? It's 8 pounds. 1 gallon is 8 pounds. I mean, can you imagine the great resources it takes to pipe 1.5 billion gallons of water, not every week, not every month, every day into Southern California? So the Manhattan Beach Botanical Garden was built, almost 25 years ago. It started getting planned out, and then a little over 20 years ago, it actually got landscaped. Back then, people were like, well, why would you want to do a drought-tolerant garden? Water's cheap, 20 bucks back then, 20 bucks for all you could use. You turned the faucet on, water was always there. Well, what we're seeing now with the drought is we're seeing mandatory cutbacks, 25%. And they say it's historic because the governor has never declared a mandatory cuts of 25%. This is historic. Yeah. And to give you an idea of how bad the drought was, we have had droughts in the past, but they were really short. 1948, 1953, those were two of the lowest years of LA. I'm just talking about LA now. The worst droughts that have ever been. On average, since they've been keeping records, Los Angeles has had about almost 15 inches of rain a year. Almost, and you have the dips, and sometimes you have a little more some years, but about 15 gallons. Well, 1948 and 1953, LA had 4 inches of rain. Does anybody know what it was last year?
Something like 2 or 1?
No, it was 3. It was 3 inches. Okay, but here's where it gets really sticky. Does anybody know what the biggest reservoir is in California?
Snow.
Oh my goodness, we have some really smart. You're going to get some extra points there. Okay, exactly. Okay, so what happens is, you
didn't get much.
Okay, yeah, no, it didn't. And so what happens is you have these big bodies of water where they get a lot of water from, but the snow cap on the mountains, it literally holds billions and actually trillions of gallons of water in the form of ice. As the summer comes, the snow melts and we have access to that. Well, they call it global warming or climate change, whatever you want to call it. What happens is LA is like a big basin. It has mountains up here, well, in the Sierra. So what happens is when we get a rain event, let's say 100% of the moisture that falls, most of it falls as rain, but a good percentage of it falls on the mountains as snowcap, and that's where we get a lot of our water. Well, unfortunately, last December, we had a rain event. We probably remember because we don't get many of them, but it was estimated about 10 trillion gallons of water fell. Now that would have surely have gotten us out of a drought. But what happened was most of it fell as rain, which fell on the sidewalks, on the streets, and maybe watered your lawn, and it all went out to the ocean. And it swept out to the ocean, swept out motor oil and stuff, and that's a whole different dynamic. And then the mountains, I don't think, maybe 1% of it, or 1/2 of 1% fell. In fact, Governor, if you noticed in the news, the governor, what was he doing standing on, it looked like straw. Where was he? Does anybody know where he was? Yeah.
Where
He
the
was
snowpack, where you're supposed to be measuring 5 or 6 feet.
Yeah, guys in back of him were looking at I mean, they were like, is there any snow around here? Is there any type of little bit of ice? There was none. So I think it was like 5 years ago, it was like under 6 feet of snow where he was, and now 0. And here's the interesting thing. The LA Times came out and quoted from NASA's top water scientist. He said that that California has about 1 year left in reserves of water, and after that they're out. Now, they still pumping water from Colorado and from Sacramento, but I mean, as far as California's reservoirs, they're going to be out. So, are we going to get more water? Who knows? But we do know that we all need to band together, and so I'm glad to see everybody here. So, interesting statistic: of 100% of the water that comes into the average residence, does anybody know what percentage goes out to the landscape, typically?
The landscape?
The landscape.
The residents?
So out of every 100 gallons, how many gallons goes out to the landscape?
50%.
Well, yeah, you know what, the average number is around 65%. Yeah, when you turn those sprinklers on, you're looking at gallons per minute, not gallons per hour. So it's pretty significant. And so they're saying that, I've talked to the water district, and they said, Mike, we've encouraged people through the years to put the low flow toilets, to put in, the shower heads, put a brick inside your tank of your water, of your toilet. Just all these say, don't brush your teeth and leave the water on, just brush your teeth and then turn the water. Things like that. They said, we've done everything we can in the house. Now it's time to tackle the outside. And so, my thought is that it's no talent you can easily cut 25% off of your total water consumption through landscaping. Does anybody know why people got interested in grass in the first place? I mean, putting in lawns, where this whole thing is?
Status symbol?
Well,
They moved from the East Coast.
well, okay. Think about it. Think about it. The 1800s, okay? I mean, pretty much it was every man for himself back then, so to speak. I mean, you wanted personal security, you carried a gun, the wall. Okay, so you have a big, huge place. Well, you didn't want a bunch of trees where somebody can come up from behind and hide and then break into your house. You wanted a lot. It was security, basically. People wanted big lawns for security. You see a big man or somebody approaching your house, you're going to go grab the shotgun. And so it was for security reasons. Do we face that today? Not necessarily, not really so. And so the thought is that since we're living in different times, why not encourage people to think differently, especially because Southern California never had water to begin with. We're like a big version of Palm Springs is what we are. And so we need to think differently. And so the idea is to take out your lawn because it does take a lot of water. Now, if anybody wants to talk about native lawns, we can do that at some other point. But this is more about taking out your lawns and then creating some beautiful landscapes. Also, too, has anybody heard of drip irrigation? Okay. I got to tell you, drip irrigation is the bomb. I mean, I love this stuff. back, it was created in Israel of 50-something years ago, and back in Israel, I mean, there's no water really, so every little bit of water is precious. So thankfully, the Israelis really have given us a gift with drip irrigation. Well, there's an American company called Rainbird who decided to really get involved with it and take it to the next step. How about, anybody know what sustainability is? Or heard of it? Anybody heard of sustainability? Okay, let me give you a definition of sustainability.
It's the name of this class.
Okay, right, thank you. Sustainable landscaping. So,
Very good.
sustainability is living today without borrowing from tomorrow. Yeah. Or you can go to Wikipedia, it's like 3 paragraphs of jargon. But living today without borrowing from tomorrow. So it's important to know that because we have just lived, last 80 years, just lived a life of excess, and now it's time to reel it back in and get back to our roots so we can give something back to the next generation and future generations. And so one of the things is, if you're onto social media, you'll find out that there's a lot of information out there about companies that produce pesticides and herbicides. And would everybody agree that there's a link between pesticides and herbicides and cancer and bad stuff? Okay, I would imagine so. And I don't know how as a society we'd live without pesticides and herbicides, like on a big scale, but on a small scale, it's just, you don't want the stuff in your homes. You just don't want it to be around it. There's a product out there, it's called drip irrigation. I brought a piece of a tubing I was going to show you. This is what drip irrigation looks like. It's this tube, and every 12 inches it has a little hole, what we call an emitter, and you just lay it throughout. In fact, you can put it down for grass. If you do decide to have grass, you'll save at least 50% water usage by having drip irrigation underground. But if you have it on planters, you can actually lay it throughout your planters. What happens is it this stuff is great. Now, the only problem with this is it roots, I mean, because what do roots do? They love water, right? So if they grow in here and then they go like a carrot, they just expand, what happens to your drip irrigation line?
Burst.
Yeah, it doesn't work. I mean, the root will grow in there, plug it up. The enemy of this. So in their wisdom, the irrigation companies say to prevent that from happening, splice in a little fertilizer injection system. It's a little tube it holds 1.5 gallons of whatever you want it to hold, and you pour herbicide in there.
Oh no!
And then that'll just kill the roots. Well, lovely. We're just putting a bunch of chemicals in, our quote sustainable landscape, or what we're trying to do. Okay, so in their wisdom, about 15 years ago, Rainbird, the world's largest sprinkler company, decided that we want to be sustainable. We're making a commitment to sustainability. So for about 10 years, they field tested a product, and it doesn't look, the hole's typically not this big, I'm going to pass it around, but they field tested, they realized that if they has anybody ever heard that if you put like a copper strip, it'll keep snails away? Okay, and yet copper can be used as a deterrent, not just for snails, but for roots. And is it safe? Well, how do you bring water into your house? Copper pipes. Okay, so what Rainbird did, they started testing this out, and the field tests were just phenomenal. And they put a little strip of copper in their Copper Shield technology drip irrigation. They're the only company that does this. So I'm going to pass this around so everybody can take a look at it. You can see the copper in it, but every 12 inches they put that strip of copper. Guess what? With that particular tubing, you could even put grass, lay under grass and lay grass on top of it, and it will never have a problem with root intrusion. And so it's a fabulous product. I highly recommend it. If you have one takeaway from this class, well, put mulch down and use the water, the drip irrigation.
Is it more expensive because of
It's about 5% more expensive. But what's the cost of chemicals going to cost you? And the hassle, and then the cost of the environment. Yeah. So it's, for me, it's well worth the cost of irrigation. And if it's done right, it can be the best thing that's ever happened to your landscape. Question?
You said, does copper really keep away snails? Is that true?
It-
And if it does, is it going to get rid of my decolate snails to get rid of the other snails?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. We'll have to check that out. We'll have to check up on that. It's a good question.
We'll talk about snails after class.
Okay.
Come talk to
So
me.
is this an underground installation or a
That's the beauty. It's both. So drip irrigation can be both. If you want a great resource and see how it's actually installed, I have a landscape company called Enviroscape, and we that's probably 60% or 70% of what we're doing these days. We've morphed into like a drip irrigation company. If you're going to do like planters, like you see here, what we would do is we would go around, we would go like this, about every 12 inches, you do like a grid. And you just staple it to the ground with 6-inch staples. Now, what's nice about if you're going to take your lawn out and do a native garden or what we call our California friendly garden, is that you can put the drip right next to the ground after you plant, and then you put mulch down on top. Now, if you have a conventional sprinkler system, the one that pops up and sprays out, if you have a lot of mulch, and that's the other takeaway, and maybe we'll talk more about that, but if you do drip irrigation, put mulch down. If you have an overhead spray drip irrigation or an overhead spray conventional system, it will take you 4 or 5 hours of running that thing for it to finally work down and get into the ground. So that's why drip irrigation hugs the ground. It's a blessing to the modern landscape. The only thing about it is, if you have a gardener, for example, who's going to put the drip irrigation in, make sure, ask them a few questions. In fact, I just put a blog out on my website. I said, look, we're too busy. We're packed to capacity right now for at least a few weeks. But if you're going to have a gardener, if you're going to do it yourself, Rainbird has their product catalog. You can go online. You can get all this stuff online. And I would ask your gardener, if you're going to have him do it, you can't get this stuff at Home Depot either. I would go to the professional place in Torrance. It's called Ewing Irrigation, E-W-I-N-G. And their number is 310-782-7821. Just give you that out, or you can contact me later. I can give it to you after class. I just want to get you, I want to set you up for success. One of a big percentage of what we're doing now is we're actually ripping out pretty new installations done by gardeners because it's fallen apart. You're a homeowner, you call your gardener, hey, Jim, the gardener, I want you to put drip irrigation. Okay, he goes to Home Depot, he buys a bunch of stuff, and a month later it's all